Mr Deputy Speaker, I've previously spoken in this House regarding family violence and on subjects such as sexual assault and mental health. And I've done so because these issues are important to me and my communities within the electorate of Dobell. Today I rise in support of the motion by the member for Gellibrand regarding the lack of attention that is provided to the issue of family violence in public debate and the importance of a bipartisan approach in addressing this complex issue, and I fully support the member on his motion. It's no secret that the impact of family violence is devastating, and last week we saw the tragic death of a New South Wales woman at the hands of her husband. Violence in the home is unacceptable, and we must never become complacent about this issue. There is no excuse for violence in the home. Consequences for victims of family violence go beyond physical injuries, trauma and fear. They also experience social and economic isolation, mental health problems, and for many, homelessness. Many children of family violence suffer dramatically. They often experience problems with their peers, demonstrate aggressive and/or withdrawn behaviour, and a reduced sense of personal safety. And sadly, in later adult relationships, regard violence as normal, hence the cycle is repeated. Additionally, the child's brain development can be impeded. A cycle of violence and control at home feeds fear and insecurity, resulting in a skewed perception of themselves and the world. We are then left with the third tier of domestic violence, the consequences for the community. With impacts such as reduced empathy for victims and a sense of hopelessness and social destabilisation, it's imperative that we as community representatives take a stand to raise awareness of this issue and reinforce that there is no shame in speaking out. With statistics indicating that 1 in 3 Australian women experience physical violence from the age of 15 and almost 1 in 5 women experience sexual violence, as a society this is completely unacceptable. A quote contained in the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children, which was launched by the Labor government in 2010, states no government or group can tackle this problem alone, has never been more pertinent than today. The second action plan is currently being implemented to increase community involvement in actions to prevent family violence and sexual assault. This government's allocation of $100 million to execute the Second Action Plan and the continuation of the fight to stop violence against women and children is further example of bipartisan approaches undertaken to combat this debilitating social issue. As government representatives, it's imperative that we support legislative means whereby practical measures can be implemented to protect the safety and well-being of victims of family violence. It's also imperative that the three arms of government, particularly the judiciary, work together to strengthen the message to perpetrators of family violence that their actions are unacceptable and illegal. Suggested practical steps to assist victims of family violence include amendments to the Family Law Act to ensure that victims of family violence are supported while dealing with onerous legal and financial impacts, having complementary rather than opposing relationships between state domestic violence legislation and federal family law legislation. And it's encouraging under the Second Action Plan the commitment to implement a national domestic violence order scheme to ensure that domestic violence orders are recognised across jurisdictions. And this is imperative to ensure that victims fleeing family violence interstate receive the same protection throughout all Australian jurisdictions. Simple solutions advocated by support services who deal with family violence on a daily basis should be rationally assessed and considered for implementation. Implementing direct strategies to ease costs incurred by family violence victims, particularly for those who are isolated from the family home, assets and personal networks. Incorporating evidence in court proceedings regarding the history of a relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, in addition to consideration of research and evidence regarding trauma experienced by victims of family violence, should be standard. Access for children to court-appointed children's solicitors and barristers and the automatic provision of evidence via video link should be commonplace and routine. Creating a safer community for Dobell and the Central Coast is something that I take seriously in my role as a federal member. Only by the continual effort to raise awareness of family violence and its consequences can we begin to acknowledge the magnitude of the problem and implement positive and lasting change. Unfortunately, in Dobell we have the second highest rate of family violence in New South Wales, and we're in the top 10 in Australia. The strongest 3 words that can ever be spoken to a woman suffering domestic violence is, "I believe you." And I acknowledge the bipartisan actions of all members of this House to tackle family violence and create a safer place for women and children. And I commend this motion to the House.
I thank the member for Dobell. The question is that this